Hello everyone and welcome to Module 8, LGBTQ+ Inclusion and Supportive Policies. Today we will be looking at the EU and LGBTQ+ equality. The aim of this presentation is to discuss how the EU supports LGBTQ+ equality by looking at the actions they are taking. We will also explore how EU laws, like the Equality Directive and Gender Recast Directive, help create inclusive workplaces. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to discuss ways to create a more inclusive and supportive work environment for LGBTQ+ employees. In this presentation, we'll explore the EU Equality Directive, which aims to prevent workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age. We'll cover direct and indirect discrimination, objective justification, genuine occupational requirements, and positive action. We will then briefly discuss the Gender Recast Directive, followed by the LGBTIQ Equality in Europe Progress Report and case studies, such as the LGBTIQ Work Equality Alliance, showing how these policies promote inclusive workplaces across the EU. In this module, we will explore the key European Union policies that promote equality and protect LGBTQ+ rights, especially in the workplace. You'll learn about the EU Equality Directive and the Gender Recast Directive and how these laws help create inclusive and supportive environments. We will also review the progress made in Europe towards achieving full equality for LGBTQ+ individuals. By the end, you will understand how these policies impact workplaces and what further steps can be taken to improve inclusion. What is the EU Equality Directive and what is the proposal? The EU Equality Directive, 2078 EC, was created by the EU to stop discrimination at work based on sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age. It sets rules to ensure everyone is treated equally in the workplace. It is now legally binding. The EU Equality Directive proposal aims to ensure everyone is treated equally outside of the workplace. It has not yet been adopted. Types of discrimination. Direct discrimination occurs when someone is treated unfairly because of their sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age compared to someone else in a similar situation. Indirect discrimination occurs when a rule imposed seems fair but actually makes life harder for certain groups. This is only allowed if the rule is important for a valid reason. Harassment is a form of discrimination. The unwanted conduct can take different forms, from verbal or written comments, gestures, or behavior, but it has to be serious enough to create an intimidating, humiliating, or offensive environment. This definition is identical to the definitions contained in the other Article 13 directives. A denial of reasonable accommodation is considered a form of discrimination. This is in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities and coherent with Directive 2078 EC. Certain differences of treatment based on age may be lawful, if they are justified by a legitimate aim and the means of achieving that aim are appropriate and necessary. Objective justification, exceptions to discrimination. Sometimes, rules that seem discriminatory are allowed if they are important for safety or another good reason. For example, safety regulations that might affect people differently. For example, an employer can set a physical fitness requirement if it is essential for the job, like in firefighting. This could disproportionately exclude older applicants or those with certain disabilities, but it is justified because it is related to the nature of the job. Negative effects of discrimination. Discrimination makes it harder for the EU to achieve goals like better employment opportunities, improving living standards, and building a more united society. By allowing discrimination, the economy and social progress suffer because it prevents everyone from having equal opportunities. EU Equality Directive Article 15 and 22. Scope of Directive. Discrimination based on sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age is prohibited in both the public and private sectors, specifically in social protection, social advantages, education, and access to goods and services. It is the role of the national courts to determine whether or not discrimination has taken place. Courts can use different types of evidence to establish whether or not indirect discrimination has occurred, including statistical evidence that shows how certain groups are impacted by specific policies. Clause 22 ensures the directive does not impact national laws regarding marital status and the benefits associated with marriage. EU Equality Directive Article 23 and 26. Genuine occupational requirements and positive action. In rare cases, treating someone differently based on sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age can be justified if it is essential for the job. This must be legitimate, necessary, and reported to the EU Commission. There are currently no well-known cases regarding LGBTQ+ in this context. Positive action measures are allowed to support groups facing disadvantage due to their sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age. These measures aim to level the playing field by promoting inclusion and addressing the specific needs of underrepresented groups, helping to create more equitable opportunities in the workplace. EU Equality Directive Articles 28 to 30. Minimum requirements, legal protections. This directive sets basic standards that all EU countries must follow. Countries can also create stronger protections if they choose. However, this directive must not be used to reduce existing protections already in place in any country. People who experience discrimination based on sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age should have access to legal protection. Organizations and legal bodies can also help by representing victims in court, based on the rules of each country. To ensure equality is upheld, countries must offer legal protection to prevent people from victimization after reporting discrimination. EU Equality Directive Articles 31 to 33. Burden of proof and social dialogue. If someone presents a case with sufficient evidence of discrimination, the burden of proof shifts to the respondent to prove that discrimination did not occur. However, they do not need to prove the person's protected characteristic. In cases where the court or competent body investigates the facts, the plaintiff does not need to prove the details of the discrimination. The responsibility to investigate lies with the court. Countries should encourage dialogue between employers, employees, and non-governmental organizations to address and combat workplace discrimination. Harassment and discrimination. Harassment is considered a form of discrimination if it involves unwanted behavior related to sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age. This behavior violates a person's dignity and creates a hostile, intimidating, and offensive environment. Each country can define harassment based on its own laws. Giving instructions to discriminate against someone based on sexual orientation, religion, disability, or age is also considered discrimination. The directive does not override national laws that are necessary to protect public security, maintain order, prevent crime, or safeguard health and freedoms in a democratic society. EU Equality Directive Articles 11 to 12. Victimization and information dissemination. Countries must create laws to protect employees from being fired or mistreated after they report discrimination or participate in legal proceedings to ensure equal treatment. Countries must ensure that the rules from this directive and related laws are clearly communicated to people, especially in the workplace. Information should be widely shared using all appropriate methods across the country. EU Equality Directive Articles 13 to 14. Social dialogue and working with NGOs. Countries should encourage discussions between employers, employees, and unions to promote equal treatment. This can include monitoring workplace policies, creating codes of conduct, and sharing good practices through research and collaboration. Countries should also encourage collective bargaining agreements between employers and employees, which should include anti-discrimination rules. These agreements must meet the minimum standards set by this directive. Countries should work with non-governmental organizations that are committed to fighting discrimination. These can help promote equal treatment and assist in addressing discrimination based on sexual orientation, religion, disability, and age. EU Equality Directive Article 17. Sanctions. Countries must create rules for sanctions when someone breaks the anti-discrimination laws. These penalties could include compensation for the victims and must be effective, fair, and strong enough to prevent discrimination from happening again. Countries must report their sanction rules to the European Commission and let the Commission know about any changes without delay. EU Equality Directive Article 18. Countries were to adopt the laws and regulations needed to follow this directive by the 2nd of December 2003. If the social partners like employers and unions are responsible for collective agreements, they needed to introduce the necessary measures by this deadline. Countries could have taken an extra 3 years to implement rules specifically about age and disability discrimination if needed. Countries must let the European Commission know how they are implementing these laws and include a reference to the directive when publishing the laws. EU Equality Directive Proposal. The main objective of the directive is to combat discrimination based on religion or belief, disability, age or sexual orientation, and to put into effect the principle of equal treatment outside the field of employment. EU Equality Directive Proposal Article 12. Equality bodies. Countries must establish a national equality body, or bodies to promote equal treatment for everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, religion, disability or age. These equality bodies must act independently and help victims of discrimination. They should also conduct surveys, publish reports, and provide recommendations on discrimination-related issues. Since it can be difficult and expensive for individuals to challenge discrimination, these bodies play a key role in offering independent support to those affected. Gender Recast Directive. The Gender Recast Directive 2006/54/EC is a piece of EU legislation aimed at ensuring equal treatment between men and women in matters of employment and occupation. This directive consolidates and updates older gender equality directives into a single instrument. Its primary goal is to combat gender-based discrimination in the workplace. This legislation is similar to the Equality Directive, but from the perspective of male and female. The Gender Recast Directive does not specifically mention transgender people, but through legal interpretations, transgender individuals, particularly those undergoing gender reassignment, are protected from workplace discrimination under the directive. Protections for trans individuals in employment situations are grounded in the prohibition of discrimination based on gender reassignment, as established by the Court of Justice of the European Union. Broader protections for transgender individuals, beyond gender reassignment, may be covered in future legislation, particularly if the EU Equality Directive proposal is adopted. Provisions of the directive. This applies to all workers in both public and private sectors. It defines discrimination broadly, covering direct and indirect discrimination, harassment including sexual and instructions to discriminate. It also allows countries to create positive action measures to support disadvantaged groups. A major limitation of this directive is that it is from a limited perspective of binary gender male and female. LGBTIQ equality in Europe. Michael O'Flaherty, Director of the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, highlights the challenges LGBTIQ people face in Europe. The ILGA Europe Rainbow Map shows that a score of 100% represents full compliance with LGBTIQ human rights. The EU average score is just 48%, with 13 member states scoring less than 50% and one scoring as low as 13%. The LGBTIQ equality strategy is a vital initiative, with Commissioner Dalli being praised for her leadership in making it a global example of best practice. LGBTIQ equality in Europe, Progress Report. This section provides an overview of the European Union's efforts to promote LGBTIQ equality across member states. LGBTIQ equality in Europe, Progress Report. Diversity charters. Over 2.5 years, the number of signatories has increased, covering 1 million additional workers. European Diversity Month in May featured 345 events, with 59 focused on LGBTIQ equality. Workshops and funding. Workshops on trans and intersex inclusion were held, While the European Social Fund supports increased workforce participation for LGBTIQ individuals. Gender-neutral language. The Commission promotes the use of gender-neutral terms in official documents and communications, and is revising style guidelines to standardize inclusive language across EU institutions. LGBTIQ equality in Europe. Progress report. Pay Transparency Directive. The 2021 directive, which includes intersectional discrimination, reached a provisional agreement in December 2022. Internal inclusion actions. The European Commission promotes a discrimination-free work environment through its diversity and inclusion plan, which includes counseling and legal support for LGBTIQ staff, along with gender-neutral language initiatives. National action plans. EU member states are encouraged to develop action plans to increase LGBTIQ participation in the labour market, particularly focusing on underrepresented groups like trans and intersex individuals. The following examples come from the European Commission's Progress Report on LGBTIQ equality, highlighting efforts across Europe to improve LGBTIQ workplace equality. LGBTIQ Work Equality Alliance is an EU-funded project to increase awareness and improve the skills of the employers and trade unions in Croatia and Slovenia to counter discrimination and harassment affecting LGBTIQ employees, provide support to LGBTIQ people, and raise awareness of challenges they face through advancement of policies and programs. The project involves developing tailor-made training for employers, awareness-raising campaign, community events and a conference. The Italian National Office Against Racial Discrimination signed an agreement with the Italian National Statistical Institute to produce a comprehensive information framework on access to the workplace, working conditions and discrimination at work for LGBT+ people, and diversity management in Italian companies. The project was divided into two macro areas of activity that included the collection of information from the main stakeholders and employers, in particular companies with 50 or more employees, and direct collection of information from LGBT+ people on discrimination at the workplace. Thank you for joining us today. Here's a quick summary of the key points we covered. We discussed how the EU supports LGBTQ+ inclusion through European directives, which is a type of law set by the European Union that sets goals or rules for member countries to follow. We looked at the Equality Directive and the Gender Recast Directive, which aim to combat discrimination and promote equality in the workplace. We highlighted the different forms of discrimination, direct being unequal treatment based on protected characteristics, while indirect being rules that seem neutral but disadvantage certain groups. We looked at the European Union's efforts to promote equality across member states, including the Pay Transparency Directive, the EU's Diversity and Inclusion Plan and national action plans. We also discussed progress on LGBTIQ equality across Europe, with case studies showcasing successful workplace inclusion initiatives. Here you can see a list of the references used throughout the presentation. These sources will assist you in researching more deeply into the EU and LGBTQ+ equality. Thank you for listening. I hope this presentation has provided you with a deeper understanding of the current landscape of LGBTQ+ rights and inclusion in the workplace.